I get it. If you've ever tried pulling a cheap fiber splicer off the shelf, you know the disappointment that follows. You plug it in, wrestle with the interface, and end up with a splice that looks like a bad haircut. The thing is, the market is flooded with budget-oriented fusion tools that promise fast splicing but end up eating your time and maybe even your patience. So the question I heard a lot from people on forums is, does the AI-20 from GrowWord actually feel like a smarter buy, or is it just another overhyped gadget? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started digging, the first thing that kept coming up was the fear of buying the wrong machine for your specific needs. A lot of installers and hobbyists are torn between a simple cleaver you can carry in a backpack and a full-blown splicing cabinet that sits in a rack. The AI-20 sits in that middle ground. It's advertised as a 4th-generation, 6-motor splicer with built-in VFL and OPM functions, plus a high-capacity 7,800 mAh battery. That sounds impressive, but the real test is how those features translate into daily workflow. Let's walk through a typical scenario. Imagine you're a small business technician tasked with setting up a new FTTH line in a suburban neighborhood. You arrive at the first pole, pull a few meters of fiber, and need to splice it quickly to keep the job on schedule. With a traditional benchtop splicer, you'd have to haul a heavy unit, find a power source, and spend a solid 10 minutes just to get the splice ready. The AI-20 promises a 6-second core alignment and a 15-second heating cycle, so on paper you could be looking at under a minute per splice. In practice, I've seen that the alignment algorithm is decent, but you still need to clean the fiber ends well and load them into the 3-in-1 holder before the machine even starts its magic. The holder is versatile. It accepts SC, LC, and even APC connectors, which is handy if you're working with mixed terminations, but the clamps can feel a bit tight if you have slightly larger jacketed fibers. That means you'll spend a few extra seconds easing the fiber into place, not a huge delay, but worth noting if you're racing against the clock. Now, the value proposition really shines when you factor in power. The AI-20's built-in 7,800 mAh battery gives you about 910 splices on a single charge, according to the spec sheet. For field work, that translates to roughly 1 full day of operation without hunting for an outlet. I've heard from a few technicians who tested it in a rural rollout. They praised the fact that the battery held steady even in colder temperatures, which can be a killer for other devices. That battery life is a practical strength you don't see highlighted in most spec lists, and it's a real time saver when you're on a ladder with limited access to power. On the flip side, the machine's high-density built-in cutting knives are a double-edged sword. The integrated cleaver is convenient because you don't need a separate tool, and it can handle up to 780 millimeters of fiber length in one go. However, the cutting blades are not replaceable in the field. You have to send the unit back for service when they dull. If you're a contractor who does a lot of straight pulls and needs a clean cut every time, you may find that a dedicated cleaver with replaceable blades is a more sustainable choice. In other words, the AI-20 saves you space, but you trade off some long-term maintenance flexibility. Another practical point, the built-in VFL, visual fault locator, and OPM, optical power meter, are nice additions if you're doing troubleshooting on the go. The VFL lets you locate breaks or macro bends in the fiber by emitting a visible red light, which can be a big help when you're dealing with conduit runs that are partially hidden. The OPM function gives you a quick read of signal strength, so you can verify that the splice you just made is actually delivering the expected power level. In real-world usage, you'll likely end up using one of those tools daily, and having them integrated means one less piece of equipment to carry. That said, the accuracy of the OPM isn't on par with a dedicated handheld meter. It's sufficient for a rough check but not for fine-tuning a high-performance link. If you need precise loss measurements, you'll still reach for a separate OTDR or power meter. Who should buy the AI-20? If you're a small to medium telecom contractor, a field service engineer, or a serious hobbyist who wants a portable all-in-one solution, this machine checks the essential boxes: decent speed, battery autonomy, and the extra testing tools built in. It's also a solid option for educational labs where budget constraints prevent buying separate splicing, cleaving, and testing gear. On the other hand, skip it if you're a large-scale installer who already has a rack of bench splicers and needs the highest possible splice loss performance. Those setups often demand a more robust alignment system and replaceable cutting blades.